The last gift my mother gave me before I turned 18 was a choice. Sign the paper, or walk out the door. I walked. Everything I still owned fit inside one backpack. For the next 5 years, no one in my family called on my birthday, at Christmas, or on the morning my name appeared in the local paper beneath the words nursing graduate. Then, when they finally remembered my number, they did not call to apologize. They called because they needed to borrow the clean life I had built without them. But that came later. I grew up in a 2-story house outside Columbus, Ohio, with cream siding, a narrow porch, and a framed piece of embroidery hanging above the living room couch. Family first, it said in blue thread. My mother, Diane Bennett, had stitched it before I was born. As a child, I believed it was a promise. It took me years to understand that our family had an order of importance. And I was not near the top. My sister Megan was 4 years older than me. She was beautiful in a soft, unfinished way that made adults lower their voices around her. She cried easily, tired quickly, and seemed to experience every ordinary disappointment as evidence that the world had been unusually cruel. My mother called her sensitive. My father called her his tender-hearted girl. I learned another word for her much later, protected. If Megan forgot a school assignment, Mom drove it to her. If she quit piano, the teacher had been too demanding. If she dented Dad's car, she had already been frightened enough by the accident and did not need a lecture. I did not have that kind of fragility. When I was 8, Megan knocked one of Mom's casserole dishes off the counter. I was handed the broom because I was better with broken things. When I brought home straight A's, my report card stayed on the refrigerator until someone needed the magnet. Megan's middle school choir certificate hung framed in the hallway for years. My parents did love me. I believe that. By 12, I had become useful in ways adults praised. I remembered appointments, packed lunches when Mom was tired, and sat outside Megan's bedroom when she was upset. No one assigned those duties. They gathered around me because I completed them. Each success became proof that I needed less care next time. I mistook that pattern for maturity. Being dependable was the closest thing I had to being chosen, and I became good at earning it. They simply loved me through confidence. Confidence that I would understand. Confidence that I would recover. Confidence that I would accept less without making the room uncomfortable. You're the strong one, Claire, Mom would say. At first, I heard praise. Eventually, I learned to hear the rest of the sentence. Even when no one said it aloud, you can lose this. You can carry that. You can wait. You can go without. In the Bennett family, compliments for me usually arrived with a bill no one had asked whether I could afford. At 15, I took a job at Miller's Market. 4 evenings a week and every Saturday. I wore a green polo, counted change until my fingers smelled like coins, and saved nearly every dollar. I had one plan: nursing school. I liked the clarity of hospitals. A fever had a number. A medication had a dose. If something hurt, you did not call it loyalty or weakness or family business. You wrote it down and treated it. Because I was a minor, I could not open the kind of account I wanted on my own. My mother signed as a joint owner. At the time, it felt ordinary. She sat beside me at the bank, smiling while the employee slid forms across the desk. For 3 years, I deposited paychecks, birthday money, Christmas cash, and the refund from a class trip I chose not to take. I skipped prom shoes, restaurant dinners, and anything I could convince myself was temporary. 9 days before my 18th birthday, the balance was $9.300. I knew the exact date I would move it into an account under my name alone. My mother knew it too. On a Thursday night after my shift, I stopped at the ATM outside Miller's to deposit my paycheck. The machine returned my card and printed a receipt. Available balance, $0. I stared at it until the parking lot lights blurred. Then I put my card back in and checked again, because a broken machine still seemed more believable than the truth. I drove home with the ATM receipt on the passenger seat. By the time I reached our street, I had rehearsed reasonable explanations: a bank error, a frozen account, a security hold. I carried those possibilities into the kitchen because the truth was still too large to bring inside. Mom was drying a saucepan. Dad sat at the table with the evening paper folded beside him. I placed the receipt in front of her. She looked at it once and went back to the pan. Megan was 4 months behind on rent. She said. Her car was about to be repossessed. She has a child, Claire. She cannot be stranded without transportation. The money had paid the rent, caught up the car, and covered what Mom called a few essentials. She spoke as if she were reading items from a grocery list. I asked why no one had called me at work. Why no one had waited 9 days. Why no one had asked. Emergencies don't wait for birthdays. Dad studied a scratch in the tabletop. I looked at him. Did you know? His silence answered before his mouth did. Mom set down the saucepan. You are 18 in 9 days. You have a job. You have plans. You are the strong one. Claire, you will earn it back. That was the moment I understood the money had never been mine in their minds. It was a family resource temporarily stored under my name. Megan's crisis had simply activated it. The next morning, I went to the bank. The branch manager was careful. Because Mom was a joint owner. He explained. She had authority to withdraw the funds. The bank could not reverse a transaction completed by an authorized account holder. He printed the statements for me anyway. From there, I went to the police station. An officer listened, then told me it appeared to be a civil dispute over ownership. Not a straightforward theft case that allowed him to make an arrest. You may want to speak with an attorney, he said. So I did. A legal aid clinic gave me a 20-minute consultation. The attorney said I might have a civil claim if I could prove the money came from my wages and gifts. My pay stubs and bank records would help. But a lawsuit would take time. The money might already be completely gone. And nothing available would put $9,300 back into my account before tuition was due. I had not failed to fight. I had simply discovered that being right and being rescued were not the same thing. On Saturday, my parents called me into the kitchen. A typed document waited on the table beneath a pen. The title read Voluntary Family Contribution Acknowledgement. It stated that I had freely given $9,300 to Megan. Expected no repayment, and had no dispute with the family. Mom said it was only paperwork. It lets the family move forward without ugliness. I read it twice. What happens if I don't sign? Her expression changed, not into anger. Exactly, but into the smooth stillness she used when affection had stopped producing the desired result. Under this roof, we act like a family. If you cannot do that, you know where the door is. I looked at Dad. He looked at the document. Upstairs, I pulled my backpack from the closet. I packed 2 work polos, jeans, underwear, my birth certificate, my social security card, and the bank statements from the branch manager. I folded the ATM receipt once and placed it inside a plastic folder. At the last moment, I took a photograph from my mirror, Sophie at her first birthday. Frosting on her fists, laughing at someone outside the frame. I took no photograph of Megan. Downstairs, no one stood in front of the door. Mom wiped a clean counter. Dad followed me as far as the garage. As I passed, he pressed something into my hand. 2 $20 bills. $40 was what he could offer without having to oppose his wife or admit what had happened. I closed my fingers around the money because pride does not buy gasoline. Then I walked to my car. I waited behind the wheel for grief, rage, or some feeling large enough for the moment. What came instead was quiet. Love in that house had always required payment. For the first time, I had declined the charge. I drove to Nora Hayes's apartment. She opened the door, saw the backpack, and stepped aside without asking how long I needed. I slept on her couch for 6 weeks. Every Friday, I filled her refrigerator with groceries. Because I still did not know how to receive kindness without turning it into a debt. No one from my family called. For 6 weeks, I slept on Nora Hayes's couch and woke before her alarm so I could fold the blanket before she saw it rumpled. Nora never asked me for rent. I bought groceries anyway: milk, eggs, coffee, Whatever I noticed running low. If she drove me somewhere, I filled her gas tank. If she cooked dinner, I washed every dish. At 18, I did not know that gratitude and repayment were different things. Kindness made me nervous unless I could reduce it to a balance and settle it. I could not afford nursing school anymore. But I still wanted a way into healthcare. I enrolled in a 6-week nursing assistant course at the cheapest community program I could find. During the day, I worked at Miller's Market. At night, I practiced taking blood pressure on anyone who would lend me an arm. My first healthcare job was at a rehabilitation center that smelled faintly of bleach, coffee, and the lemon lotion residents kept beside their beds. I changed sheets, helped patients bathe, and learned how much dignity could depend on the person holding a washcloth. I also learned that bodies rarely failed all at once. Usually, they compensated quietly until compensation became the illness. Families could do that too. After Nora helped me find a room to rent, I worked 2 jobs and took prerequisite classes one at a time. Anatomy on Tuesdays, microbiology the next semester, statistics from a professor who spoke as if every number had personally disappointed him. I studied in break rooms and laundromats. I kept flashcards in my car and reviewed them at red lights. At 20, I entered a 2-year nursing program with a partial scholarship and federal loans. At 22, I passed my licensing exam on the first try. I cried in the testing center parking lot for exactly 3 minutes. Then called Nora. "I knew you would," she said. The words should have felt like praise. Instead, some old part of me heard another expectation to keep succeeding. By 23, I was a pediatric nurse at a children's hospital in Columbus. I signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment with a narrow balcony and a kitchen barely wide enough for 2 people. I bought a second-hand desk for the spare room and imagined using it to study for future certifications. From the outside, my life looked steady. Inside it, I was still living by the rules of the house I had left. I covered other nurses' shifts because saying no made my chest tighten. I volunteered for holidays because coworkers had children, spouses, or parents nearby. I had none of those things, so I treated my time as less valuable. Once, after I agreed to work a 3rd extra shift in the same week, a nurse named Tasha leaned against the medication cart and asked when I had last taken 2 days off together. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. "You know you don't have to prove you can survive every schedule they hand you," she said. "I'm fine. I know you can handle it." She held my gaze. "I didn't ask whether you could." That sentence stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. For 5 years, my family called 0 times. Not on birthdays, not at Christmas, not when I graduated, not when the local paper printed my name beneath a photograph of the nursing class. I told myself they probably did not know where I lived or where I worked. It was easier to believe I had disappeared than to believe they knew and had chosen silence. Then, on a Tuesday night in March, I came home after a 12-hour shift and put water on for tea. My phone rang at 9:40. The screen showed the landline number from the house where I grew up. I let it ring 3 times before answering. My mother was crying. "Claire," she said, without hello, "thank God, Megan needs you." She did not ask whether I was safe. She did not ask where I had been for 5 years. She did not say she was sorry. She spoke for several minutes about Megan being overwhelmed, fragile, and in danger of losing everything. I stood in my kitchen, still wearing scrubs, while the water boiled dry behind me. Finally, I asked, "What does she need me to do?" My mother's crying stopped just long enough for me to hear the purpose underneath it this time around. Mom said there had been a misunderstanding with officials. She used phrases that sounded harmless because they contained no people, paperwork issue, temporary arrangement, agency concern. Whenever I asked what had happened, she returned to how frightened Megan was. "Is Sophie safe?" I asked. A pause. "She is with us." That was not an answer. Mom wanted me to come home on Sunday so everyone could sit down as a family. 5 years of silence had apparently been downgraded to a scheduling problem. "I'm not coming anywhere until I know what this is about. Claire, please don't make this harder." Give me the caseworker's name. Her breathing changed. It isn't like that. If there is a caseworker, it is exactly like that. She gave me a name, Marisol Vega. She also gave me the number for Franklin County Children's Services, though she tried twice to persuade me to call after Sunday dinner instead. I called at 8 the next morning. A receptionist transferred me to Marisol's voicemail. She returned my call an hour later. Her voice was careful. I can't confirm or discuss a child protection case with someone whose identity and relationship have not been verified, she said. I told her I was Sophie's maternal aunt and a pediatric nurse. My job doesn't give me access, I added. No, it doesn't, she said, and I trusted her more for saying it. If you want to be considered as a relative caregiver, I can explain how to submit identification and proof of relationship. After that, I can discuss only the information necessary for placement. Placement. The word made the room feel smaller. I asked whether Sophie was in immediate danger. I can tell you that the agency is evaluating where she can safely stay. Marisol said, I cannot tell you more until you are verified. She emailed the forms. Before completing them, I searched Megan's name through the county clerk's public criminal docket. I expected unpaid tickets or a missed court date. Instead, I found a charge for child endangering. The entry gave few details, but enough remained visible. Police had responded to Megan's apartment after midnight. Sophie, age 6, had been found alone. Megan had not returned until the following morning. I read the docket twice. Then I called Mom. This time she stopped pretending the problem was paperwork. She said Megan had gone out with a man she was seeing. Sophie had been asleep. A neighbor had overreacted. Nothing bad had happened. Nothing happened because someone heard her crying, I said. Mom moved quickly past that. She explained the family's solution. I would become Sophie's approved relative caregiver. Sophie could sleep at my apartment on school nights. Mom and Dad would help after school and on weekends because I worked long shifts. Megan could join family dinners, birthdays, and occasional outings, as long as no one turned every visit into a report to the county. You wouldn't be lying, Mom said. You would simply be allowing the family to support you. I heard the shape of it. No single dramatic violation, just a series of small exceptions. One dinner, one late evening, one overnight because the weather was bad. By the time anyone questioned it, the old arrangement would have returned under a new address. I told her I needed time. That evening, she called again while I was in the shower. The voicemail arrived in the gentle voice she used when she believed the argument was already over. Sophie can be registered at your place. Honey, during the week, she is mostly with you. On weekends, she can be here with people she knows. No one needs to know which room Megan sleeps in, as long as Sophie has your address. I listened 3 times. Then I saved it. The following morning, I completed the verification forms, attached my driver's license and birth certificate, and sent them to Marisol. When she called, I told her I wanted to be evaluated as a genuine kinship placement. Not a name on a form, I said, not an address my family can borrow. I gave her my conditions. All information had to come through the agency or be confirmed directly with me. There would be no private family arrangement. I would follow every safety plan. I would not conceal contact between Megan and Sophie. I would not change my account to protect my sister from consequences. Marisol was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Are you trying to save Megan? Or are you trying to protect Sophie?" I looked at the saved voicemail on my phone. "I don't know yet whether I can protect her," I said, "but I know I will not lie to save Megan." I returned to my parents' house on Sunday afternoon, 5 years after leaving it with $40 in a backpack. The street looked smaller than I remembered. The maple in the front yard had grown wide enough to shade the driveway. But the house itself seemed preserved. Cream siding, brass porch light, a wreath my mother changed with the seasons. Dad opened the door. For 1 second, neither of us moved. Then he stepped aside and said, "Your mother's in the living room," as if I had been gone for an ordinary weekend. The embroidered family first sign still hung above the couch. Megan's choir certificate remained in the hallway. Its gold seal faded at the edges. My absence had left no visible mark. Megan crossed the room before I had taken off my coat. She wrapped both arms around me and began crying into my shoulder. "I knew you'd come," she said. "I kept telling everyone my sister would help." She said it like faith in me. But I heard the old assignment underneath it. No apology for the 5 years. No question about my life. Just relief that the position had been filled. Mom stood behind her, smiling at the reunion she had already decided we were having. Dad held a coffee mug with both hands. The old clock kept ticking above us. Sophie sat at the far end of the couch. She was 6, thin without looking underfed, with Megan's brown hair and none of her noise. Her ankles were crossed. Her hands rested in her lap. Whenever an adult spoke, her eyes moved to that person before the sentence was finished. Mom offered me coffee. Before she reached the kitchen, Sophie slipped from the couch, carried her own cup to the sink, rinsed it, dried it with a towel, and returned it to the cabinet. She used a wooden stool that had clearly been placed there for her. No one noticed. I had seen children become self-sufficient early for many reasons. Sometimes it was confidence. Sometimes it was necessity. The difference was not in what they could do. It was in how carefully they watched the room while doing it. Sophie watched everyone. Mom began explaining the agency's overreaction. Megan interrupted to insist she had only been gone a few hours. Dad said the important thing was keeping Sophie with people she knew. I listened without agreeing. When Mom asked me to look at some documents, she directed me to the sideboard in the dining room. "Second drawer," she said. "Sophie's birth certificate should be in the blue folder." The drawer stuck halfway. I pulled harder. Beneath the blue folder lay a thick manila envelope with my name written across it. Inside were 5 years of my life. A clipping from the community college newsletter announcing scholarship recipients. The newspaper photograph from my nursing graduation. A printed page from the hospital website listing me among the pediatric nursing staff. Screenshots from Nora's social media, including a photograph taken on the balcony of my apartment. Someone had written my address in Mom's handwriting on the back. I stood there holding the evidence of attention without contact. Mom appeared in the doorway. "You kept these?" Her expression softened. "Of course I did. I'm your mother. I always kept track of you." The sentence landed harder than if she had admitted forgetting me. They had known where I studied. They had known when I graduated. They had known where I worked and where I lived. Silence had not been the result of losing me. It had been a decision. Mom reached for the folder in my hands. "We were waiting for you to be ready." I gave it back. In the living room, Megan was telling Dad that Sophie needed stability, saying the word as if she had not been the one who removed it. I left before dinner. Sophie followed me to the front door. She stood close enough to speak quietly but not close enough to touch me. "Are you the aunt with the apartment?" she asked. "Yes." "Does it have another room?" I thought of the second-hand desk, the blank walls, the unopened box of shelves. "It does." She nodded once, not smiling, as if she had recorded the location of an emergency exit. Driving home, I did not think about Megan's tears or my mother's envelope. I thought about a 6-year-old asking about an empty room without once asking whether anyone wanted her in it. The kinship assessment began with paperwork. Marisol sent me a checklist that was 6 pages long. Fingerprints, criminal background checks, income verification, a copy of my lease, medical information, references from 3 adults who were not related to me. Rules calmed me. Rules did not care who cried hardest at the kitchen table. They did not call one child fragile and another strong. They asked whether the smoke detectors worked and whether the rent was paid. Nora was my first reference. Marisol asked her how I responded under pressure. "I'd trust Claire with my life," Nora said later, recounting the interview. Then I told her the part that worries me. "What part?" "That you're always the first person to show up. But you never believe anyone will show up for you." I wanted to argue. Instead, I wrote her name beside emergency contact on another form. Marisol explained that Sophie was still staying with my parents under a temporary safety plan. Their home had not been fully approved. It was conditionally acceptable because they had agreed to specific restrictions. Megan had to live elsewhere. Her visits with Sophie had to be supervised. My parents had to report every contact and permit unannounced visits from the agency. If they follow the plan, Sophie can remain there while we evaluate longer-term options, Marisol said. If they don't? Then we move quickly. At my apartment, an assessor checked locks, water temperature, medication storage, and the distance between the bed and the window. She opened cabinets, tested alarms, and asked where a child would sleep. I led her to the spare room. The second-hand desk sat against one wall. A printer box served as a nightstand because I had never bought anything else for the room. This room, I said. The home visit made me notice everything I had taken for granted: food in the refrigerator, clean towels, a working lock, a landlord who answered repair requests. None of it felt impressive. Still, I began to understand that safety was rarely dramatic. Most of the time, it was a collection of ordinary promises kept on schedule, even when no one was watching quietly. That weekend, I moved the desk into the living room. I bought a twin bed, plain white sheets, and 2 inexpensive comforters so Sophie could choose between blue stars and yellow flowers. I did not call it her room. Not yet. When she came for her first approved weekend, I said, "This is the room you can use while you're here." She stood in the doorway with a small duffel bag and looked over everything without touching it. "Can I close the door?" "As much or as little as you want." She left it open 4 inches. At the store, I let her choose the comforter. She picked the blue stars, then asked twice whether the yellow one cost less. When I said the price did not matter, she watched my face to see if I meant it. Switching to day shift cost me the night differential. The reduction appeared in my next paycheck as a number I could calculate exactly. I paid it without resentment. This was not money taken from me in the name of family. It was a cost I had examined and chosen. That difference mattered. On Saturday morning, Sophie stood in my kitchen and asked, "What food am I allowed to eat?" I cleared one shelf in the pantry and marked it with blue stickers. "Anything with one of these is yours. You do not have to ask." She touched a sticker on a box of granola bars. "Even if you're asleep?" Even then. Her second question came after Nora stopped by with a lamp. "When you have company, where do I go?" "Wherever you were already going to be." Sophie frowned. "This is your space too," I said. "I won't send you away because another adult comes over." Her third question came that evening when she nearly dropped a glass. "What happens if I break something?" "We make sure no one is cut. Then we sweep it up." "That's all?" "That's all." I gave her a plastic cup and told her it had survived worse things than either of us. She dropped it twice on purpose before dinner. The second time, she almost smiled. The question she repeated most often was where she would sleep the following Sunday. I bought a dry erase calendar and placed it on the refrigerator. School days, visits, my apartment, my parents' house, each had its own square. When something changed, I told her before I erased it. She checked the calendar every morning. That night, I passed the spare room and found the door still open 4 inches. Sophie was asleep on top of the comforter, fully dressed. Her shoes stood beside the bed, perfectly aligned, their toes pointing toward the door. The pink backpack appeared on the second weekend. Sophie was in the living room watching cartoons while I vacuumed the spare room. The vacuum head struck something beneath the bed. I knelt and pulled out a child-sized backpack, faded at the corners and zipped all the way around. I should have left it closed. Instead, I opened it. Inside were 2 shirts, a pair of leggings, underwear, and socks, each folded into a square. A toothbrush was sealed in a sandwich bag. A small box of raisins sat beside a rabbit with one ear worn nearly smooth. Nothing in it was random. It was not a toy bag or an overnight bag packed by an adult. It was a 6-year-old's emergency plan. I was still kneeling when I felt Sophie standing in the doorway. She did not look angry or frightened. She looked resigned, as if I had discovered something she assumed every sensible person already understood. "I keep it ready," she said. "For what?" "So it hurts less when they forget me somewhere." The room seemed to narrow around us. At 18, I had stood in my childhood bedroom and decided which pieces of my life could fit into one bag. I had believed that was the end of something. Sophie was 6, and she had already learned the same calculation. I closed the zipper and slid the backpack beneath the bed. It belongs to you, I said. No one opens it or moves it unless you say so. You're not going to make me unpack? No. She watched me carefully. You decide when you don't need it anymore. She nodded and returned to the television. Over the next several weekends, Sophie began talking in fragments. Children rarely deliver the truth in a complete story. They leave pieces where they feel safe enough to drop them. The night the police found her was not the first time Megan had left her alone. There had been other evenings. Beginning when Sophie was 5. Megan called them grown-up nights. Sophie was responsible for locking the door and keeping the television low. She knew how to make 3 dinners, cereal, toast, and a cheese sandwich. The stove is against the rules when I'm by myself, she explained. Once, Megan left her at a neighbor's apartment and forgot to return until the following afternoon. Sophie had learned not to ask when her mother would be back because adults became irritated when children requested times they could not promise. She described all of this without tears. Whether I was hearing it as her aunt or as a nurse no longer mattered. An adult had been told that a child had repeatedly spent nights alone. I called Marisol. Marisol warned me not to question Sophie or praise her for telling. Children, she said, can begin shaping memories around adult reactions. So I kept my voice ordinary. I made dinner, helped with spelling words, and let the professionals carry the questions I was angry to ask. Sophie was interviewed by a child specialist in a quiet room designed to avoid leading questions. She repeated the same details in the same practical voice. The agency amended the case, and Megan's requirements became stricter. For a few weeks, Megan appeared to understand. She attended parenting classes. She found part-time work at a salon supply store. She arrived early for 2 supervised visits and brought Sophie a book about a girl who built a treehouse. Sophie placed it beside her bed. I let myself hope. Then Megan came to my apartment one evening without calling. Sophie was at an after-school program. Megan sat at my kitchen table and told me she had been assigned the helpless role long before either of us understood what roles were. Mom never made me finish anything, she said. Not piano, college, a job, even my marriage. Every time things got hard, she told me I was too sensitive. At least your part came with a spine. For one moment, I saw both of us as children wearing costumes our mother had chosen. Then Megan leaned forward. I need you to tell Marisol the casino was the first time. I said nothing. Just say I made one terrible mistake. They trust nurses. One detail to you was an entire night to Sophie. Her face hardened. You always think you're better than me. No, I said, I think Sophie deserves the truth. It was the first refusal I gave my sister without attaching an apology. The following Tuesday morning, Marisol made an unannounced visit to my parents' house. Megan's car was parked inside the garage. Marisol did not call me until after she had completed the visit. She found Megan's clothes hanging in the closet of my old bedroom. Cosmetics beside the bathroom sink. And a toothbrush still wet in the cup. Sophie told her Megan had slept there a bunch of nights, and sometimes stayed with her while my parents went shopping. My parents had not misunderstood the safety plan. They had signed it, then treated it as an inconvenience to manage. Mom insisted Megan had nowhere else to go. She said no decent mother would put her own daughter on the street. I heard the irony before Marisol repeated the sentence to me. The agency ended my parents' conditional arrangement that afternoon. Because my background checks and initial home inspection were complete, Sophie could be placed with me on an emergency kinship basis while the full assessment continued. When I arrived, Sophie had packed her duffel bag and was standing beside the front door. She did not cry. She looked at the duffel, then at the pink backpack hanging from one shoulder. Do I need to bring both? She asked. Yes, I said. Bring whatever you want. Mom followed us onto the porch. This is temporary, she told Sophie, but she was looking at me. Once everyone calms down, we'll fix this. I buckled Sophie into the back seat and drove away before answering. Nora met us at the apartment with groceries and towels. My first instinct was to tell her I could manage. Sophie stood beside me, watching to see whether help created a debt. I stepped aside and let Nora carry the bags inside. It was a decision, but children learn the rules of a home from what adults allow themselves to receive. The campaign began the next morning. First came affection. Mom left a casserole outside my apartment with a note saying she was proud of the woman I had become. She sent photographs from childhood and messages about forgiveness. Then came the family version of events. According to my aunt, I had returned after 5 bitter years and used the government to punish Megan. According to 2 cousins, I was keeping Sophie from the only family she had ever known. Mom added Sophie's name to the prayer list at church under a request for healing and reunification. Evelyn Brooks called me that evening. She was a retired elementary school secretary who had fostered 3 children before adopting one. I remembered her from church as the woman who carried peppermints and corrected adults when they spoke about children as if the children were not in the room. Your mother asked several of us to sign a letter supporting the grandparents. Evelyn said. Did you? No. Her answer came without ceremony. She isn't asking the church to pray for Sophie. She is asking us to pray that she wins. Evelyn had seen families confuse reunification with restoration of authority. She agreed to speak with Marisol and later became my third reference. For the first time since the case began, someone from my parents' world chose the child over the story being told about the child. A week later, Marisol told me Sophie's father had been located and formally notified. His name was Ethan Cole. He lived outside Indianapolis and drove regional freight routes. Megan had described him as a man who disappeared before Sophie learned to walk. The truth was less simple. Ethan had been inconsistent. He sent money irregularly, changed routes often, and avoided confrontation whenever Megan or my mother became hostile. His apartment had 1 bedroom, and his work kept him away overnight several days each week. He was not currently an appropriate placement. But he had not vanished. He had called. Megan sometimes blocked him. He had asked to see Sophie, then accepted excuses when visits were cancelled. He had suspected things were wrong and convinced himself my parents would intervene. I kept thinking her family had it handled. He told me over the phone. That seems to be how every adult in Sophie's life has forgiven themselves. I said. He did not argue. Ethan agreed not to oppose my placement. More importantly, he sent Marisol screenshots from his old phone. In several messages, Megan asked him to confirm that she had been sick on nights she left Sophie with neighbors or alone. In one, she begged him to say the casino trip was the first time. Another thread included my mother. Ethan had threatened to contact child services after Sophie called him crying one night. Mom replied that involving outsiders would only traumatize the child further. Then she wrote the sentence that explained more than she intended. Don't make this bigger than it is. Claire always handles things like this. By September, Sophie had started first grade at a school 6 blocks from my apartment. I gave the front office copies of the temporary placement order and Megan's supervised contact restriction. I sat across from the principal while she added notes to Sophie's file and entered a private pickup code that only I and my parents were supposed to know. For several weeks, nothing happened. That was how danger often returned, not with a warning, but after enough ordinary days had convinced everyone to lower their shoulders. On the second Thursday of the school year, my phone rang at the nurses' station at 2:47. The school secretary sounded uncertain. Ms. Bennett, we need to confirm that Sophie was authorized to leave with her mother. The hallway around me seemed to tilt. She was not. The office had received my paperwork, but the new restriction had been scanned into one system and not yet updated in the pickup screen used at the front desk. The regular secretary was homesick. Megan had presented identification, named Sophie's teacher, provided the correct pickup code, and said my father had suffered a medical emergency. A new clerk saw a biological mother whose information still appeared in the older record. She released Sophie. A teacher noticed them crossing the parking lot. Sophie was holding Megan's hand. But her body was stiff. And she kept looking back toward the building. The teacher told the principal, who checked the paper file and called me. I did not drive through Columbus looking for them. I stepped into a supply room, closed the door, and called 911. My niece has been removed from school in violation of a juvenile court supervision order, I said. I gave the dispatcher Megan's description, her license plate, the likely places she might go, and Ethan's contact information. Then I called Marisol. After that, there was nothing to do but wait. 4 hours is not a long time on a clock. It is long enough to imagine every possible ending. At 6:38, an officer called. They had located Megan and Sophie at a shopping mall on the east side. Both were physically safe. Megan had bought Sophie a soft pretzel and a stuffed bear. When police approached, she seemed genuinely confused by the urgency. I'm her mother, she kept saying. I took my daughter out for an afternoon. That was what frightened me most. Megan did not believe she had endangered Sophie. In her version of events, rules applied only until her feelings became painful enough. When Sophie came home, she walked past me without speaking. The stuffed bear remained in its shopping bag on the kitchen counter. She went into her room and returned holding the pink backpack against her chest. Both arms wrapped around it. I sat on the floor several feet away. You're staying here tonight, I said, and tomorrow night. The calendar has not changed. She looked toward the refrigerator but did not release the bag. That night, Sophie asked whether the school could make her leave again. I promised no system was perfect. But I would change every password, carry every order, and answer the phone. It was not magic. It was honest enough. Later, the police report noted that Megan had known the private pickup code. Only 3 adults had it. I called my father. He admitted giving it to her. She said she wanted one normal afternoon with her child. He said, I didn't think she would take her without asking. You knew she was only allowed supervised visits. She is still Sophie's mother. And Sophie is still the child who had to wait 4 hours for the adults to find her. Dad went quiet. You bought Megan one normal afternoon, I said, with 4 hours of Sophie's fear. He told me I was making him sound cruel. I said cruelty was not always the intention. Sometimes it was the bill someone else paid for your need to keep the peace. Marisol called after 9. The school would revise its procedures. Megan's visits would remain at the supervised center. My father could no longer serve as an approved supervisor or pickup contact. Then Marisol said the part that changed the direction of the case. Temporary placement leaves too many doors open. Claire, you need to decide whether you are willing to become a legal party and ask the court for custody. I looked down the hallway. Sophie had fallen asleep with the pink backpack beside her pillow. For the first time, I understood that keeping her safe for the present was not the same as giving her a future she could trust. Hannah Price's office occupied 2 rooms above a pharmacy and smelled faintly of burnt coffee. She had been referred through a nonprofit legal network and charged according to income. She did not promise justice. She promised preparation. Sophie's neglect case is already open in juvenile court. She explained, you are currently the approved kinship placement. But that does not automatically make you a party with permanent rights. She would file a motion to intervene and a motion requesting legal custody. Legal custody is not adoption, Hannah said. Megan remains Sophie's legal mother. She retains certain rights, and she can ask the court to modify the order later if circumstances change. But custody would give you authority over school, medical care, and where Sophie lives. It would also place me openly against my family. Hannah did not soften that part. We began with dates. The account withdrawal, the bank visit, the civil consultation, the document my parents wanted me to sign, the night I left, 5 years without contact, Mom's call, the proposed address arrangement, the voicemail, Megan's repeated absences, the safety plan violation, the school pickup. I wrote the first draft as if I were telling a story. Hannah returned it covered in marks. Remove heartless, she said. Remove always. Replace they never cared with what they did or did not do. Courts trust dates, records, and patterns. Let the facts supply the adjectives. So I rewrote my childhood into numbered paragraphs. It was strange to see years compressed into exhibits. The things that had filled entire rooms inside me became bank statements, screenshots, and certified copies. The ATM receipt went into a plastic sleeve. Mom's voicemail was downloaded and preserved. Ethan's messages were authenticated through his phone records. Marisol provided documentation of the failed safety plan. The school produced its pickup log and internal incident report. Then Hannah found something I had not expected. My parents had submitted financial documents while asking to be reconsidered as caregivers. Among them were statements from a retirement account and an emergency savings fund. 5 years earlier, when Mom withdrew my $9,300, my parents had more than enough money to cover Megan's rent and car payments themselves. Using their retirement funds would have triggered taxes and a penalty. Taking mine had cost them nothing. I had spent years believing they chose between Megan's survival and my future. They had chosen between their financial comfort and my future. Dad came to my apartment 3 nights after Hannah sent the first discovery request. He stood in the hallway holding his cap. "I know what happened with your money wasn't right," he said. It was the first direct acknowledgement he had offered. For one breath, I let myself receive it. Then he added, "But your mother can't lose both daughters." There it was. Even his apology had arrived carrying an assignment. He asked me to remove the family history from my affidavit. Megan's mistakes were relevant, he said, but the old account and the night I left would only embarrass everyone. We could resolve the custody privately and stop turning pain into evidence. "Why didn't you use your savings?" I asked. He looked toward the elevator. "Your mother said we'd take a penalty. So you let me take the penalty instead. We thought you would recover." "You always did," he added softly. I understood then that my resilience had not merely failed to protect me. It had become their justification for causing the harm. "Are you here to apologize?" I asked. "Or to buy back my silence?" Dad had no answer. Before leaving, he placed an envelope on the entry table. Inside were 2 $20 bills. The same amount he had given me at 18. $40 was still the largest apology he could make without changing sides. I put the money in the evidence folder. Not because it proved a crime, but because it proved a language. Over the following weeks, Hannah assembled the filing. She attached my affidavit, the voicemail transcript, selected messages from Ethan, the agency records, and the school report. She requested that I be recognized as a party and that legal custody be considered at the next dispositional hearing. Signing the affidavit felt different from the paper on my parents' kitchen table. At 18, they had asked me to sign a lie so I could remain their daughter. At 23, I signed the truth knowing it might end that role permanently. Hannah notarized the final page and sent the filing to the court. The hearing date was set for November, giving both sides several weeks to decide whether truth was negotiable or simply inconvenient. 2 days later, she called me at work. "Megan retained counsel," she said. "They've made a settlement offer." Hannah read the settlement offer across her desk. Megan would not oppose my request for legal custody. Sophie would remain with me. Megan's visits would stay supervised for 6 weeks. And if she attended every parenting class, arrived on time, and followed the case plan, both sides would ask the court to consider unsupervised visits. In exchange, I would withdraw the sections of my affidavit describing the family pattern. The bank account, the paper I refused to sign, the 5 years of silence. My mother's voicemail would not be offered as evidence. "It is not an irrational offer," Hannah said. That was what made it dangerous. I could have legal authority without risking a contested hearing. Sophie could stay in the same school and sleep in the same room. Megan would still face requirements. At least on paper. All I had to do was let the record begin after my family's behavior had already shaped everything in it. That evening, Mom called. She did not cry. Her dry voice had always meant she believed she was close to winning. "Come home," she said. "You and Sophie. Sunday dinners. Christmas morning. We can put everything back where it belongs. A photograph arrived while she spoke. My old Christmas stocking hung from the living room railing. Another showed the blue ceramic mug I had used as a child. The final picture was of my former bedroom, freshly made with a quilt I recognized. Your room is still yours, Mom said. It was not. Megan had slept there for months. My clothes were gone. The posters had been removed years earlier. Mom was not offering me a room. She was offering the memory of one, polished until it resembled a childhood I had never actually lived. Still, I wanted it. I wanted cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning and my father pretending not to watch sentimental movies. I wanted Mom to touch my hair without asking me to fix something. I wanted Sophie to have grandparents, cousins, and a table crowded with people who knew how she took her cocoa. The wanting embarrassed me. I knew the offer was manipulation. My body responded to it anyway. Some injuries heal into scars. Others remain doors that open when the right voice says your name. All you have to do is take the old stories out of the case. Mom said, families do not need judges to tell them how to forgive. But forgiveness was not what she wanted. She wanted the facts returned to private ownership. After we hung up, I called Nora. They say we can be a family again. She was quiet before asking, the family you had, or the family you still hope they might become? I looked toward Sophie's room. The door was open 4 inches. The Blue Star comforter rose and fell with her breathing. I don't know. Yes, you do, Nora said gently. You just wish the answer hurt less. The next afternoon, Mom appeared at my apartment carrying a casserole. When I opened the door, she moved forward as though entry were automatic. I did not step aside. Her smile tightened. I brought dinner. You can leave it here. Claire, I am your mother. That is a relationship, I said. It is not a right of entry. For several seconds, we stood facing each other in the hallway. I was surprised by how ordinary a boundary looked from the outside. No thunder, no music, just my hand on the door and my mother discovering it would not open because she wanted it to. She set down the dish. You have become very cold. No, I have become clear. That night, I reread the proposed agreement. It offered certainty, but only if I agreed that the danger began with Megan's casino trip instead of the household that had taught every person in it how to avoid responsibility. It offered me belonging, but sent the cost forward to Sophie. I thought of the pink backpack beside her pillow. Then I called Hannah. The affidavit stays. On Wednesday, Mom called one final time. So we will see you Thursday? Yes, I said. You will. I ended the call before she could mistake attendance for surrender. On Thursday morning, the settlement agreement waited in a courthouse conference room with a pen placed neatly across the signature line. 5 years earlier, my family had placed another pen in front of me and asked me to sign a lie in exchange for staying. This time, they asked me to erase the truth in exchange for coming home. I left the pen where it was. No, I said, everything stays in the record. If my family wanted a conversation, it would happen under oath and in daylight. No one argued after I refused the agreement. Megan's attorney gathered the unsigned pages. Mom's face closed. Dad stared at the table. Hannah led me into the courtroom. Juvenile court did not look like television. There was no jury and no polished speech waiting to rescue anyone. The room held a tired judge, a court reporter, 2 counsel tables, and files thick with other families' worst days. Sophie was at school. Nora had pickup covered. Marisol sat behind Hannah with the agency records. Judith Hall, Sophie's guardian ad litem, carried school reports and home visit notes. Ethan had driven from Indiana. My parents arrived with Megan between them. When I took the witness stand, Hannah began with dates. I testified about the account withdrawal, the document I refused to sign, and the 5 years without contact. I explained Mom's proposed arrangement for Sophie's address and the private exceptions she expected me to allow. Then Hannah introduced the evidence. The agency report documented my parents' violation of the safety plan. The school's incident log showed Megan had used the confidential pickup code. Ethan's messages showed earlier nights when Megan asked him to cover for her. Financial statements established that my parents had enough savings to help Megan without taking mine. Finally, Hannah played Mom's voicemail. Her voice filled the courtroom. Warm and reasonable. Sophie can be registered at your place. Honey, no one needs to know which room Megan sleeps in, as long as Sophie has your address. Mom sat still. For years, she had controlled the family by controlling the version told afterward. A recording had no loyalty to her. Megan's attorney asked whether I resented my sister. Yes, I said, for some things. Isn't this custody request revenge? If I wanted revenge, I would have stayed away. Staying away was working well for me. He asked whether I believed I was more capable than Megan. I believe Sophie needs an adult who follows the rules even when they are inconvenient. At the other table, Megan whispered to her attorney. He touched her sleeve, but she pulled away. You don't understand, she said toward the judge. Claire always fixes everything. That was her job. The room went quiet. Megan had not meant to confess to a family system. She had meant to explain why my refusal felt like betrayal. Near the end of my testimony, the judge removed his glasses. Ms. Bennett, you are 23, unmarried, and early in your nursing career. Legal custody is not temporary babysitting. Why are you asking this court to place a child with you? I looked once at Mom. Her purse rested on her lap like a shield. Dad sat beside her with both hands clasped. I had spent most of my life waiting for one of them to ask what their expectations had cost me. The judge had asked a different question. All my life, I was told I was the strong one. I said, in my family, that meant I was expected to absorb the consequences after everyone else left. Sophie does not need another person who can endure more damage. She needs someone who will not leave in the first place. The court reporter typed the words into the record. Judith testified that Sophie was improving in my care. She slept more consistently, attended school regularly, and showed less anxiety when schedules changed. Marisol confirmed that my home study was complete and that I had complied with every safety requirement. Ethan acknowledged his failures without asking the court to excuse them. He supported custody remaining with me and requested structured contact he could maintain. The judge granted legal custody of Sophie to me. Megan remained her legal mother. Her visits would continue under supervision, with a written case plan and a process for requesting changes if she demonstrated sustained stability. The order did not erase her. It stopped everyone from using promises as substitutes for proof. Mom stood before the hearing ended. You were born cold, she said. Keep the child. You have taken everything. The judge told her to sit or leave. She left. Dad followed. At the door, he looked back once. Whatever apology lived in that look was still too small to become an action. I did not go after them. Hannah placed the order in my hands. I had gained authority to protect Sophie and lost the last fantasy that my mother's love might arrive without a price. Outside, the November sky over Columbus was gray. I sat in my car for less than 2 minutes and cried. Then I wiped my face and drove to Sophie's school. Court had decided who could sign her forms, choose her doctors, and tell the adults where she would sleep. The door that mattered was the passenger door opening at pickup, and Sophie climbing inside to ask what we were having for dinner. Legal custody changed the signatures on Sophie's forms. For the first month after court, she still wore clothes to bed. She checked the calendar every morning and again before brushing her teeth. If I came home 10 minutes late, she waited beside the apartment window with the pink backpack at her feet. I stopped telling her not to worry. Worry was a skill she had practiced until it felt like protection. Instead, I told her where I was going, when I expected to return, and who would come if something delayed me. Then I kept those promises, one ordinary day at a time. Megan continued supervised visits. For a while, she attended classes, kept her job, and brought library books. Then she arrived late, cancelled twice, and missed a visit without calling. Sophie sat at the center coloring the same flower until the paper tore beneath her crayon. I did not say her mother was trying her best. I said, she did not come, and that hurt. Children deserve language that does not require them to deny what happened to protect an adult's intentions. Ethan began Sunday video calls. He missed one during a snowstorm, then called from a truck stop when his route cleared. He did not become a perfect father. He became predictable enough for Sophie to stop asking whether each call would be the last. The harder change was mine. I had built my life around being the person who could cover another shift. When Sophie had a fever, I called the charge nurse and stayed home. When Nora offered to pick her up, I learned to say yes before proving I had exhausted every other option. The first time I took 5 days of leave, I spent the night checking the hospital schedule as if someone might discover the pediatric floor could function without me. Nora closed my laptop. "You are allowed to be missed without being needed," she said. We took Sophie to a lake north of Columbus. She refused to swim past her knees and collected smooth stones. On the final morning, she handed me 3 because my pockets looked empty. 6 months after court, I found the pink backpack open on her bed. The clothes were in drawers. The toothbrush was in the bathroom. Sophie threw away the stale raisins herself and kept the worn rabbit. "Can the backpack go in the closet?" she asked. "Anywhere you want." She hung it behind the door. I did not tell her she was safe now. Safety was not a sentence. It was the next breakfast, the next pickup, the next adult doing what they said. That evening, I opened my own closet. My old backpack sat on the top shelf, still packed with documents, cash, and a change of clothes. I removed everything. I scanned the ATM receipt and bank statements, placed the originals in a fireproof box, and folded the backpack beneath the winter blankets. For years, I thought healing meant forgetting the door that closed behind me. Instead, it meant no longer living ready to run. 7 years later, Sophie was 13 and offended by almost everything I did. I breathed too loudly during movies. I used punctuation in text messages. Limiting her phone after midnight proved I understood nothing about modern life. I loved the disorder. A child expecting to be moved keeps track of every possession. Sophie spread herself across our home because she believed she would still be there tomorrow. One July afternoon, she came out wearing a swimsuit and carrying the faded pink backpack by one strap. "What's in there?" I asked. "Towels, sunscreen, snacks, normal backpack stuff." At the pool, she dropped it beneath a chair and ran toward her friends without looking back. The zipper remained open. A striped towel hung from one side. Nothing inside was folded for escape. When Sophie was 6, she had asked whether my apartment had another room. At 13, she complained that her room was too small. My rules were unreasonable, and dinner contained too many vegetables. She was mouthy, funny, occasionally selfish, and still entirely certain she would be home tomorrow. That certainty was the life I wanted to give her. My family had called me strong because they expected me to survive whatever they took. Sophie taught me another meaning. Strength was not how much pain a person could carry without asking anyone to stop. Sometimes it was keeping the door locked. Sometimes it was opening it for people who came to help. And sometimes it was a child leaving her emergency bag unattended because she finally knew where she belonged.